So, good afternoon from Halifax. It's a bit drizzly outside, but the same can't be said for tomorrow's racing.
No, certainly not. It's a cracking day, isn't it? One of, obviously we've got classics in this country. We've got the Irish champion. Whatever floats your boat on the flat, you're going to find something to really get your teeth stuck into.
Yeah, really stellar weekend, because there's also the Sunday as well, which we'll touch on very, very briefly. But the main focus is on Saturday's action in Doncaster. I'm going to start off with what looks a really tricky handicap with Portland.
Yeah, we can start with the Portland. I thought we were going to start with the Ledger, but...
Sorry, I've gone in race card order. We can start with the Ledger if you like.
We'll go with the Portland now.
Causing havoc. I can only apologise. We'll start with the Portland anyway, and I think the best way into this race is to sort of comment on how good a hand or strong a hand that Michael Dodds looks to have, because at the moment he has the two market leaders.
Yeah, exactly. Like you mentioned, the two at the head of the betting. I think is it Holmeswood is around a 4-1 chance, and about 9 or 10-1 that we're looking at Dakota Gold, and they've both got quite similar profiles really. You go back sort of towards the start of the season, they're both rated a fair bit higher than what they are now. For whatever reason, it just hasn't happened for them, but there have been more encouraging signs of late. We saw Holmeswood at the Ebor meeting, certainly wasn't seen to best effect that day, running on strongly at the finish, best of those held up. You just saw that run and thought a return to his best is imminent, and obviously given how far he's dropped down the handicap, when he does come back to his best, he's handicapped to win.
It's nice to see Sylvester de Sousa at the top meeting of the day, because normally you find him when Royal Ascot on, he could be at Thirsk or somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
How much of a positive is it that he's on board Holmeswood?
Look, there's no doubt for me that he's the best jockey that's riding in the country at the moment. You mentioned those lesser meetings that you see him riding at. He's just regularly going there, having trebles, having four-timers. Just so often he's literally being the difference between these average horses that don't have anything in hand, and you stick him on them, and like I say, he makes a difference. He turns the seconds, the thirds into firsts. He's just the best there is around at the moment, I think.
How do you attack a race like this? Is the draw something that you go to first, or looking for one to make the pace? Or?
Like you say, you get such a big field, you want to start trying to cross a few out, and I like to start looking at the draw, and there's a good piece that Simon Rowlands has written that's available on the website. Suggest you check that out if you want to read about the draw in more detail. But he's looked at the last 10 runnings of the Portland, and they suggest that there's a pretty strong trend towards those that are drawn in the middle stalls or higher. So if you're in a low draw, it looks like you might be up against it. So I'm sort of prepared to be against those in, sort of 1-6, 1-7, 1-8, that kind of draw. They probably are going to be up against it if, the trends that we've seen in the draw in the recent run-ins hold true.
With that in mind, are there any that are shouting out to you as having really good chances, or is it more of a sort of a couple of each way sort of race?
Yeah, well, I mentioned Michael Dodds. We only talked over Holmeswood initially. Dakota Gold, we do need to mention. He's got a good draw, what I think, in stall 15. Like I said, come down the handicap. There's a lot to like about what he did 2 runs ago. He was drawn on the wrong side in the Great St Wilfrid. He actually won his race on his side narrowly, and was actually dropped £1 for that. So, surprising really. But that suggested his turn is near, and he ran pretty well at Thirsk last time. Ended up probably on the wrong side there, challenge, but the way he went through the race, lots of zest. I mean, that's what he tends to do. Dropping back, I think, half a furlong, probably be in his favour. He's a real strong traveller, sometimes probably a little bit too exuberant. So a strongly run 5.5 furlongs will play to his strengths, definitely.
Yeah, I remember he really tanked into the race at first, didn't he? And
yeah, that's right.
There's one I've got cliff notes really and what you're thinking. There's one that you think is potentially well in on his all-weather form, in the form of you don't do you.
That's right. You don't do you is Richard Guest's. Like you say, the all-weather form is key. He's won off significantly higher than what he runs off tomorrow. And there was a fair bit to like about what he did last time. That was back on turf. He was a winner there, and he has actually won 3 times on turf, so it's not like he's an all-weather specialist. Yes, his form at the moment is better on that surface, but that obviously gives him a little bit to play with. And again, stall 14, I could see him being there and thereabouts.
Who else is catching you? I've got one here at around 20-1 at the minute, Wentworth Falls as well, that you quite like.
Yeah, I think you've got to give him a squeak, and at a price, he's probably the most interesting of those that are sort of around 16, 20s plus. I mentioned about the draw, stall 8, that is potentially a bit of a negative. You'd rather see him be a little bit higher than that, but he does tend to be dropped out, so I'd imagine you'll see him sort of dropped out towards the centre pack and hopefully come through. He's just a horse that's been in really good form all year. He's been running well off this kind of mark. The problem with him is he travels strongly and tends to need a real truly run race, and he's been running in much smaller fields generally. His fourth last time behind Muskika at Thirsk. Not far behind Dakota Gold actually, and you just sort of look at the price of those two, and Wentworth Falls does look big in comparison to that one. So I think, like I say, this bigger field, he's a course winner. He tends to run well at Doncaster, where they get racing a long way out, and it allows those that are held up to just come into the race a little bit more gradually. And I could certainly see him outrunning his odds of about 16-1.
So if I had to nail colours to the mast in any way, it looks wide open. I mean, there's a few we haven't. We could be here all day mentioning them. Golden Apollo is having a great summer. Where would you be siding with?
Yeah, like you say, there's a few others you could mention, but I've had two bets in the race, and Dakota Gold, who, like I say, is well handicapped and is running himself into form, and Wentworth Falls, who probably doesn't have as much in hand potentially as what Dakota Gold does, but he's in form and he's going to get a race run to suit, I hope.
Okay, so I'll try and stick to the script this time around. It's the St Ledger now we're going to jump to.
Yeah.
Of course, the final classic of the season, it's sort of been a bit mixed in terms of how favourites have done in terms of betting. How do you find the St Ledger? Is it a race that you just like to watch, or do you like to attack it?
Yeah, play it on its merits. If you look at the prices and you think something's too big, back it, yeah. If you think it's too short, lay it. You know, definitely happy to get involved. And we've got an interesting shape to the race in that we've got two horses that are significantly shorter than anything else. They've both got solid chances on form, but you know, whether they should be quite as short as what they are, I sort of have my doubts, to be honest.
Yeah, as you say, it's a race that's only really taken shape. When did the depths come through? Yesterday?
They did, yes. Yeah, Thursday.
And Lati Dara has shortened up considerably since being declared. She was mooted to be going to France instead, but she comes here. She was really, visually really impressive last time at York. Is the big question about her a trip thing?
I think that's the big talking point, definitely. Obviously, she's proven over 1.5 miles. She's got to step up to 1.75 miles. But for me, when you look at the way she goes through her races, she's a galloper. She doesn't look like she's a strong traveller that quickens. I look at the way she races, you look at that pedigree, it's 1.5 miles blood through and through. Dame Doremi, she was better at 1.5 miles. I mean, I think she was a winner over 12.5 furlongs. She's certainly better at middle distances than she was around 1.25 miles. You look at other horses in a pedigree, Rewilding, he was related to Doremi, her half-brother. He stayed 1.5 miles very well. He's actually beaten favour for the St Ledger, we should mention, but stamina wasn't to blame that day. He's just never going for whatever reason. But yeah, I don't think stamina is going to be an issue for her. I think she should run a race under the conditions. It's just whether you want to suggest that she's a good bet at under 2-1 to do so, when there's a couple in here that are also going to improve for the step up in trip, I think.
Okay, I assume then that the same comments are sort of going to be said for Kew Gardens as well. It has drifted a little bit out to 5-2 now, and it's been, you know, it was really impressive in the Queen's Bars, but are you just swaying towards his value in taking him on at the current odds?
Possibly, I think. Yeah, like you say, you can't really knock his claims too much on form. He got that impressive win at Royal Ascot. He's gone on and improved on that. He's won a Group 1 since in the Grand Prix de Paris. Very easy to pick holes in that form. A lot of these French Group 1s these last couple of years just haven't been taking a great deal of winning. That was one of them. And in fact, he gets his best figure from being beaten in the Great Voltager last time, because as that Group 1 winner, he was carrying a penalty there. That absolutely smacked of a pipe opener for this. Wasn't given anything like a hard time. A little bit further back than ideal as the way the race was run, and I think you'd expect him to get a lot closer to Old Persian than what he did under these conditions. The step up in trip back up to 1 3/4 miles will suit him probably better than it would Old Persian.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Of course, talking about the Voltigeur form there, a good trial for the Ledger. Old Persian won that day, and he's got a really good strike rate, 6 from 10 in his career. Do you think he's the way to go at about 9 to 1, or would you be opposing him as well?
He's just a really progressive horse, isn't he? And it's interesting you mentioned those prices, because 9 to 1 against 5 to 2, when they come out very similar horses from the Voltigeur, and I think it's just a case of people are thinking, like I do, that Kew Gardens is going to be a little bit more match fit and ready this day. But you can't really knock Old Persian too much in that, like you say, he's got a really good strike rate. He just keeps turning up, getting the job done. And it wasn't like he stole the race by any means in the Voltigeur. They set a really good pace. The time figure backs up the form figure, fully. And if you want to get involved at 8, 9 to 1, I wouldn't really say, it's a bad bet. I couldn't put you off at that kind of price. It's perfectly fair given his solid form claims. And you can suggest he's not as sure to be suited by the longer trip as what Kew Gardens is. I can see that, but equally it's factored into his odds.
We'll quickly mention the other one in the Voltigeur there. It was 5th, the Pentagon. 33 to 1. It's been really solid so far this year, but is he potentially a victim of his ownership and could be involved in team tactics with Ballydoyle?
It's possible, but I thought the most likely pace horse was going to be Nelson. He made the running in the Voltigeur, didn't he? The Pentagon was out the back that day, and I can see the case for him on profile rather than form, really. He's a horse I was quite keen on earlier in the season. I think I gave him a bit of a squeak in the Derby. I can't remember whether it was on here that I put him up each way or not, and obviously he didn't deliver that day. And he's got one piece of form since then that gives you a bit of encouragement. He was way out the back in the Irish Derby where they just didn't go a gallop. He ran on strongly. He looked as though he could be a potential Ledger horse. He just ran a bit flat in the Great Voltigeur. He needs to improve on that, but he is stepping up to 1 3/4 miles. He is definitely going to stay. If they do set it up and go a good gallop, he might be running on at the death, but he just had a fair few chances in Group 1 company, and I'd just be slightly disappointed. This Ledger looks a strongish race, and if he was to win it, then I think maybe it's not quite as strong as what we all thought.
Yeah, we've mentioned Old Persian, and he's one half of a very strong hand for Godolphin here, because they've got Loxley as well, and he's been a real improver so far this term.
Very similar profile to Old Persian in that started out at a low level and sort of gradually gone up. I say started out at a low level. He was disappointing in the Racing Post Trophy last year, but since then they've sort of gone back to basics and stepping him up gradually this year. And on the Timeform figures, you give him a bit of a chance. He's on an adjusted figure of 133p. We've got the top rated on 138p, so not a huge amount to find. For me, it's just a slight concern as to how solid that last run in France is. We've got a 7-year-old that he was just ahead of or beat in second that day that seemed to put up a big career best. So the form itself looks a little bit weak to me, and he looks like he's a second string behind Old Persian, and I would expect Old Persian to probably get the better of him, to be honest.
Okay, potentially the second string, the next one we're going to mention it is Southern France, 14 to 1 at the moment. Is he a Nice prospect?
Dear. He could well be, definitely. If we can just put that pretty lame gag to the side and just concentrate on his form. But he's an interesting horse for me in that he's stepping back up in trip. He's looked better the further he's gone in his career to date, and he shaped really well behind Kew Gardens in the race at Royal Ascot. That was a pretty steadily run 1 3/4 miles. He got outpaced and then was running on strongly. And we didn't see him again till the Irish St Ledger trial. And the way that was run was just no use to him whatsoever. He was dropped out towards the rear. The winners had a soft lead, made all, and he's just sort of run on strongly in the closing stages. Now, it all depends on your view of how this race is going to be run. Given that there is a so-called chink in the armour of Lartidar, is it Lartidar? Yeah, Lartidar is perceived to be her stamina, and that Kew Gardens is proven over this trip already, then is it the case that we're going to get the Ballydoyle horses setting it up for the stayers? And if they do that, then I think as well as Kew Gardens getting the race run to suit, Southern France is definitely going to get the race run to suit. And he hasn't had as many chances to show his form as what some of these have. You know, he's never been tried in a Group 1 like a lot of these. So it's not a huge surprise that his rating is still lagging behind a little bit. He's got the P. For me, I can really see him coming with a rattle in the closing stages. Whether he can pick off quite enough to win the race, I could only be hopeful, but he'll be carrying my money each way.
Okay, now one of the most unorthodox profiles in here is Raymond Tusk, because he's sort of fast-tracked his way straight into the Eclipse, and then he's shaped well since, but I think the right question to ask is, in shaping well, has he also shown he's possibly got a bit to find in this company?
Like you say, the fact that he's tried races like the Eclipse and come up short there, he's run well since then. Like you say, he's a winner in listed company at Hamilton, but it was only Austrian School that he's beaten there. Likeable as Austrian School is, he's only sort of a useful or smart handicapper. He's a fair way off sort of these kind of Group 1 staying races. Raymond Tusk, he was beaten in the Geoffrey Freer last time. He probably would have finished a bit closer if he'd have got a clear run. He just made a bit of interference, but in terms of winning a Group 1 like this, he looks like he's going to come up short to me.
Yeah, do you think he needed to win the Geoffrey Freer to... Do you think he would be shorter than 22-1 had he won the Geoffrey Freer?
Yeah, I think he would. You know, his form would obviously be that little bit better, but you know, getting beaten there, it does just sort of seem to cap his ability, and obviously to win a St Ledger, he would have to step up on what he's shown.
One who perhaps has slipped under the radar a little bit is DXB, who's been one of the most consistent horses in training this summer.
Well, he certainly was, wasn't he, in the build-up, and then since the Derby, everybody, you know, straight after, I think he was anti-post favourite for this race, and it looked a natural target for him. But since then, he's sort of just dropped down a level or two. He's disappointing in the Irish Derby, and then a couple of runs since in the Grand Prix de Paris and the Gordon Stakes. But for me, neither of them have sort of, well, none of the three races have been run to suit. All quite small fields or steadily run races, and what this horse does want is a proper gallop and a test of stamina and maybe a little bit of cut in the ground. It's been raining at Doncaster today. I don't know whether they're going to have quite enough, but any rain that does fall is going to see him to advantage. And you know, he's another one of those that at the prices, I can see why people are making a case for him, because you know, the Derby run, there's nothing wrong with that. He's got valid excuses since then, and you know, fortunately, Connections have finally given him a little bit of a break. He's not been seen since August. Hopefully that 6-week break can freshen him up a little bit.
Yeah, and I suppose if you look at his placings as well, you'd be hard pressed to put people off backing him each way at 16-1, because he must give it a really good shot of hitting the frame at the very least. Yeah,
that's true. I mean, I don't know whether I'd advise many people to ever back a Mark Johnson horse each way. You know how some of them horses can run. They're very in and out, and DXB, I guess, to a certain degree, does show that. But on his best form, he's certainly got chances of finishing in the first 2 or 3. And you know, if he's about 14-16-1, I'm not going to tell people that that's a bad bet.
Okay, there's 3 or 4 we haven't touched on, but I don't think we need to unless you want to.
No, I'd like to think that we've got it covered between those. It might be worth mentioning Made Up, who has been supplemented for this. Her form got a bit of a boost in the Lily Langtree, was it God Given, who she finished in front of, coming out and winning the Park Hill. So, you know, but it looks a big step up. I suspect she won't be good enough. I think Connection would be absolutely delighted if they could steal some black type and get her placed in a classic, but she's probably up against it. But fair play to them for having a go, really. Okay,
am I right in thinking then that Southern France is the bet for you in this?
That's correct, yeah. Not overly against either Lardy Tar or Kew Gardens, other than the fact that, you know, that they're 7-4 and 5-2. That's taking out plenty for when you can make a case for some of these Ballydoyle horses improving for this stiffer test of stamina. And like I say, I'm hoping that we'll see Southern France running on strongly in the closing stages.
Okay, we'll move on now to the Champagne Stakes.
Let's do that.
Okay, Group 2 for 2-year-olds, and according to the betting anyway, 6 are due to go to post, 3 to concentrate on, and more importantly, there's one out clear at the moment, both on ratings and in the betting, Too Darn Hot. How impressed were you at Sandown with him?
Massively, yeah. You know, we sat here before the Solario saying that he'd got this to prove, he'd got that to prove. It was all about potential rather than achievement at the time, and with that extra run under his belt, he's now got the form in the book, hasn't he? Timeform figure of 118p adjusted to 132 for the conditions makes him clear top on the day, above the standard usually required to win this race, and as importantly 118p has him joint top amongst the 2-year-olds that have run so far this season. So all of a sudden everything is there for him. Really impressive from what we saw. He's only proven on good to soft ground. I don't think it's going to be quicker than good tomorrow, so the ground shouldn't be an issue. For me, it's a case of what finishes second to him.
I suppose it's a really big statement to make that as well, because he's joint top at the moment with Calix, whose form has just been boosted again and again and again. It was boosted the other day at Doncaster with Cardham. It just seems to keep getting raised all the time, that form.
Yeah, you can't knock what Calix's form is looking at. Obviously, the Coventry runner-up came out and won the Group 1 out in Ireland as well, didn't he? So, advertised, I think it was. So, you know, you can't knock his form. Just such a shame that he's missing the rest of the season. It didn't do his sire Kingman any harm. He obviously had his season cut short by injury after winning the Solario. So, fingers crossed, he can come back and do what he did. Yeah,
it's a hint for just how high we think of Too Darn Hot, but at the same time it isn't a complete rollover this, because he's facing 2 really smart 2-year-olds in Dark Vision, who's been bought by Godolphin, and Phoenix of Spain as well.
Yeah, both of them group winners. Obviously Dark Vision won the Vintage at Goodwood and Phoenix of Spain the Acomb at York. Looking at those 2 races, given that Dark Vision carries a £3 penalty for his, I'm just preferring Phoenix of Spain in a view to land in the forecast. Dark Vision form hasn't really worked out that well. Also, they went a strong gallop that day. Dark Vision was out the back and was ridden to pick up the pieces a little bit. It might be that he's just not quite as good as he looked that day, and just wonder whether we'll be looking after the Champagne and wondering whether he's necessarily one of the wisest investments that Godolphin have made. I dare say for a horse that costs $15,000 as a yearling, they've probably had to pay a fair bit more than that to get hold of him. So we'll see how that works out. But like I say, Phoenix of Spain interests me more. I think the Acomb form looks pretty good. He was impressive there. That was only his 3rd run. I see no reason why he shouldn't carry on improving. And if he does that, like I say, it makes him clear second best in this.
I must admit I haven't had too much of a look at the pace map for this, but I'm just thinking back to Goodwood when Dark Vision came from the absolute clouds to win that day. There's only 6 runners. He's a Johnston runner. Sylvester de Souza booked. Do you think they could potentially try and set him off from the front here and change his tactics?
Certainly, potentially, you know, they wouldn't want to be dropping him out the back too far, I wouldn't think, particularly when we know Too Darn Hot has made the running or can sit prominent, and I'd be amazed if Too Darn Hot is sat anywhere other than 1st or 2nd. So obviously Frankie on board there as well. There isn't really, still, there tends not to be a better jockey from the front than Dettori. So I think wherever he is, if you're riding Dark Vision, you probably want to be damn close to him as possible, but it just might prove immaterial given what I think is the gulfing class between them.
Okay, we'll switch over to the Irish scene now, to the Irish Champion Stakes then, and I mean it's a stellar race this, and round 6 as well, believe it or not, between Roaring and Lion and Saxon Warrior. It's 3-2 in terms of placings to Roaring Lion, and do you think he's just going to confirm his superiority here?
I think he is. I mean, you say it's a stellar race. I think it's a little bit disappointing when you think of some of the horses that could be here. Poet's Word obviously isn't running. Crystal Ocean, Enable, both of those obviously ran at Kempton last week, could have run here, would have added something to the race. And in terms of when we've seen how this race has worked out in the past, you think back to the renewal that Almanzor won, when Golden Horn ran in it, the Great Gatsby, when Australia, the Derby winner, was taking him on. So I think there's a few horses that you can argue are missing from this race, and for me that means that Roaring Lion ends up here with a bit of a penalty kick. What we know about him is that 10 furlongs and fast ground suits him ideally. He's a real strong traveller. I think the tight track that Leopardstown will suit, and I just don't see any reason how Saxon Warrior reverses the form with him now.
I'm just looking down the field here. If you think that he's got Saxon Warrior's measure, is there any others that could be potential dangers? I mean, there's some interesting profiles. Verbal Dexterity was 4th in the Racing Post Trophy last year, allowed to be rusty last time. If he finds his 2-year-old form, could he be a different proposition, or has he just got a lot to find?
Yeah, he's got a fair bit to find. Maybe one day he could find it, but probably not under these conditions. He looks like he's a bit of a mudlark to me. Obviously, it's going to be quite quick. He might still be interesting for the autumn with this under his belt, but probably not tomorrow.
Can the same be said for a Day then, who potentially needs it soft as well, because he was an emphatic winner of the Lincoln all the way back
exactly. I just wonder if he's running here as much. They would have loved the ground to have come up soft, but they stay here and have a run just to try and learn a little bit more about his trip requirements, because I think he holds entries in the QE2 and the Champion Stakes on Champions Day. So hopefully they'll learn a little bit more about which of those races is more suitable. I'd be surprised if he was good enough. It's quite easy to pick holes in his form. He's a Lincoln winner. This is a Group 1. The Group 2 that he won at Sandown, again, that doesn't look all that strong. He's an interesting horse, but not necessarily interesting for this day under these conditions.
And then looking even further down the market, we've got a Group 1 winning filly in Rhododendron, who admittedly has been below par the last 3 runs, and even further down, Veryville is a Grade 1, not Group 1, I think. Another top level performer potentially on his day. If Roaring Lion runs below form, could we be looking at these thinking, crikey, they were a big price?
Yeah, I mean, if Roaring Lion runs below form, it could be an absolute crapshoot, and 4 or 5 could win that. But trying to predict which one might beforehand, I think, is pretty futile. Rhododendron, like you say, she's coming off 2 absolute shockers. The fact that they put the blinkers on for the first of those suggests, or was that last time they put the blinkers on? But either way, it suggests that it's not all physical with her. There might be something that's holding her back. Deauville, he's presumably in here as a pacemaker of some sort for obviously Saxon Warrior. I don't know what whether they want it to be a slowly run race or a fast run race. We'll find out, I guess. But I'd imagine that's why Deauville's in there. And Athena, she's the other O'Brien horse. Again, she just looks out of her depth. It'd be nice to pick up some Group 1 black type again, wouldn't it, with her? But like I say, it's all about Roaring Lion's race to lose, and I don't see how he does it.
Yeah, does that really mean by default then that Study of Man could be the biggest threat? Jockey Club winner, Breeders' Jockey Club player?
I'm not sure he will be, definitely. You look at that French form, we were on about earlier. These French Group 1s, since there was Rouget, he had the virus, didn't he? Was it last year or the year before? I think it was last year. Since then, these French horses, there just doesn't look to be the quality in France as what there was. And I'm just sort of watching a lot of these listed 2-year-old races that what look below tier listed horses in the UK are going over, running to 90 odd and winning them. There just doesn't look to be much strength in depth to these French races at all this last couple of years. And the Timeform ratings tell you that the French Derby that he was winning, it's not very strong form. He's got an adjusted figure of 125. That's still behind the likes of Verbal Dexterity, never mind Saxon Warrior and Roaring Lion. So I can see why people are interested in him on profile, but in terms of form, I just wouldn't bother with him. It's just a race to watch, I think, Roaring Lion, to hopefully prove that top class performance at York wasn't a one-off.
Potentially could double him up with 2 Down Hot, possibly, or
If that's your kind of thing, then yeah, both of them look absolute penalty kicks, and you're looking for reasons why they wouldn't run to form. That's the only way they're going to get beat.
Okay, one other race taking place on Saturday, which we will touch on, even though, as you say, penalty kick could become a treble this actually. Alpha Centauri runs in the Matron Stakes, but does run up against Lawrence, who's had a really, really good season.
She does, yeah. Lawrence, she's sort of got her reputation as much for a likeable attitude rather than a form. Excuse me. And that's the problem. She sort of wins her races narrowly, and Alpha Centauri, on the other hand, she wins hers by half the track, and that's what we're dealing with. I think on the Timeform figures, Alpha Centauri's got a stone in hand. She's got the good to firm going, which is apparently what Connections think she needs. Again, you're looking for reasons to oppose her. I couldn't find any. I think she's about 3s on, but she just got to run to what she did last time, the time before, and the time before that. It's not like she's only got one piece of form that makes her the outstanding candidate. All 3 of her last ones do.
I suppose as well, she's now proven that she can win in any sort of situation. There's 3 O'Brien runners in behind, but you'd assume, however way they try and attack that race, Alpha Centauri.
Yeah, unless the jockeys have got lassos, I can't see how they're going to get a beat.
Okay, simple as that then. Alpha Centauri should win a 5th straight Group 1.
Yeah.
And last but not least, we'll go on to Sunday in the Irish St Leger. Now, I had a quick look at this and thought it was a bit of a poor renewal, really. The betting has Flag of Honour as the around about 7-4, 9-4 favourite, Latrobe 11-4, and Weekender 4s. Where would you be looking at this?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, like you mentioned about it being a weak race, the Timeform ratings are actually headed by a horse that was beaten in a handicap last time. I got Weekender that ran a really good race in the Ebor, and that piece of form makes him the top races. So it does sort of tell you that this is, a pretty weak race as far as Group 1s go. It's an interesting one tactically. You've got Flag of Honour and Cypress Creek, who are the O'Brien horses that are front runners. I'm a little bit surprised Cypress Creek is in there, given that Flag of Honour is presumably the O'Brien number 1. He certainly looks out on his form to date and the betting, but Cypress Creek being in there can only potentially get in his way, really. So I'm not sure how that's going to pan out, and that would sort of put me off a little bit. I think at the prices you mentioned there, that Weekender's around 4-1. Given that he doesn't have to lead but can do. It's interesting, he was actually in the September Stakes potentially as Enable's pacemaker. They had a change of plan, and Enable obviously made all there. So I think I'd side with him, not really with any great conviction, but just sounds a little bit overpriced given that the race should be run fine for him, and his form is at least as good as what anything else has got in the race.
Yeah, Latrobe was never really in it last time at York, but is a great Group 1 winner, won the Irish Derby. Is it will he stay sort of question about him?
I think he probably will stay. It looks a more suitable race for him than what the Juddmonte did. I think having won the Irish Derby, he ended up being a little bit difficult to place. In terms of races over 1.5 miles, obviously you've only got the Voltager. He would have had to have carried the Group 1 penalty. He could at least run in the Juddmonte without the penalty. The problem with that is he came up against far too good, far too fast rivals, so he wasn't good enough there. But this looks a decent enough spot. I don't know whether this is necessarily the be-all and end-all, or given Connections and how they won the Melbourne Cup with a similar type last year, whether they've got a little bit of an eye towards that race as well, I don't know. But he's got a little bit to find on the form, and I'd be surprised if he did it tomorrow.
Yeah, I was just about to say he's got a nice weight, hasn't he, in the Melbourne Cup, or have they released the weights yet?
I haven't seen, but given that he's a 3-year-old, he'll obviously get a fair bit of weight for age, and obviously they won it last year with one off virtually bottom weight who had a similar profile, so he probably will be in there at the foot of the weights, I would think, yeah.
And finally, I suppose Idaho potentially might be a bit mean, but it looks like a failed 1.5 mile to me. But it's a weak Group 1, and he's 6-1.
Yeah, he's sort of here as an afterthought. I think, like you say, they tried him at the 1.5 miles. He's come up short this season. they've tried him over further. He's come up short in better Group 1s, against the likes of Stradivarius. Did he even have a go in the Gold Cup? Can't remember now off the top of my head. But
possibly. He's run over 2 miles last twice,
yeah,
hasn't he?
So, they may as well persevere with him. You lose nothing by having another go. But in terms of his form, he just looks to have lost a little bit of his edge. And even in a weaker Group 1, like the Irish St Leger, there looks to be a couple in there that look a bit more interesting, I think.
Okay, well, I think that's everything on the itinerary, unless I've completely messed up. And
it is, but it tells you how strong a weekend's racing is. That there's still a lot of good action that we haven't had chance to talk about, isn't there? Like the first running of is it the Flying Five as a Group 1? There's a lot to go at. Let's just hope that we might have pinpointed you in the direction of 1 or 2 half-decent bets, and hopefully everyone that's tuned in will enjoy a really good weekend's racing.
Absolutely. If I had to pin your flag down, which one would you say would be your best bet? Would it be Southern France in the Leger? Or? Yeah,
they're the two that come to me. Obviously, that one in the Leger, Southern France, and also going back to the Portland, the Dodds Horse, Dakota Gold. That's probably also just as interesting, I think.
Bro, 2 double figure prices as well. So thank you very much, and happy punting.
Cheers, thank you.